welcome to Write the Docs, episode number 12. I'm Jared Morgan, product manager and other things. Wow, what a year it's been. We're here at the end of the year, and we've got the last podcast to do before the year ends. So it should be a good one today because we've got some special guests on the show joining us today. But before we introduce those, let's introduce the regular panelists. First of all, yes, we have Tom Johnson. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Jared.
How are you going today?
Doing well. The weather is really cold here in California. It's down to 40s, which is almost unbearable.
Really cold. Like in Celsius, that's about 10 degrees or something like that, I think.
I have no idea.
Pretty chilly. Yeah. Cold, by the sound of things. If my Fahrenheit conversion doesn't fail me, that would be nice. Well, here it's boiling hot because it's summer. So, yeah, it's most unpleasant and sticky. Yeah, a little bit gross, but that's okay. Now, panelist that we always have on the show is Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hey, and just to make you feel weird, it's actually snowing here. So there you go.
Snowing. I could do with some of that at the moment, for sure. I would like it to be snowing here right now. It would be great.
I really don't think you do, but anyway.
It's the thing with snow, isn't it? It sort of has this romantic sort of notion to it. Well, really, if you have to live it day in, day out, it's really quite horrible. Yeah, okay. Well, without further ado, I think we should actually introduce our guests today. So, because it's the end of the year and because this is actually a podcast called Write the Docs, we were thinking it might be a good idea to actually have some of the community on to talk about the various aspects of Write the Docs. And I'd like to introduce Eric Fulcher. Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are y'all doing?
Really good. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I guess to keep on a theme, it is beautiful and sunny here in Portland when it should be snowing. So, so it goes.
There you go. Of course, last but we have Mikey Ariel joining us as well. Hello, Mikey.
Hi there.
How's it going?
It's good. I'm in Prague right now, and it's 3 degrees Celsius, and it was snowing last weekend, and it will snow next weekend. But it's just enough snow to be pretty, but not so much that the whole city shuts down. So I kind of like that. Better than doing
that is kind of good. Now, yeah. Mikey, you and I know each other, don't we? From a previous life.
Yes, we do.
Yes. Where do we know each other from?
We know each other from Red Hat.
Yes, we do. Yeah, I remember meeting you for the first time. I think it was over a chat like this, actually, or a phone call. And I met you in your role. I think you were a senior technical writer when I first met you at Red Hat, right?
That I still am. So I took a little detour through community management, but I'm very much still somewhat of a senior technical writer. Yes, but I'm still doing the thing at Red Hat.
Yeah, it's cool. I like the fact that one thing that I think we'll probably talk about more in this chat is that the thing that's great about Write the Docs is you tend to catch up with people that throughout your life you've met already. Yeah, it's kind of cool to catch up with everyone again through their various walks of life. So I think the way this sort of chat's going to work today, I think it's going to be pretty organic. We've got a bit of a question list that we've sort of pre-planned, but we're going to just deviate from that if it feels right. And so Eric and Mikey a little bit better and see what they have to share with us today. So I think probably the most logical place to start off at the beginning is, this is probably a question for you, Eric, but how did Write the Docs actually start as a community?
Sure. So Write the Docs really spawned from Read the Docs, which is where the, confusingly similar two things that I work on day to day, name came from. And so it was really kind of spawned as a user conference for folks that use Read the Docs, which is my kind of open source documentation hosting platform. And yeah, so it was really, we were like, let's do an event in Portland for the people, because there's lots of people out there that are using our platform, care about documentation, but there's nowhere to go for them to really get together and know each other. And so, yeah, so we kind of, myself, Troy Howard, and Eric Redmond were at a bar in downtown Portland, and Troy has a habit of starting conferences, he likes to say. And so, yeah, so we were just kind of complaining, and he took action and really built a little website and a landing page. And the kind of magical thing was when we launched it, it just kind of exploded. It landed on Hacker News, on Reddit, all these places, and it kind of grew very quickly from our conception of it to something much larger, which is the conception of it now, which is just a general documentation conferencing community.
Yeah, interesting. So you say that it sort of grew from one thing that you guys set up originally to something that's quite different to what you originally planned. How did that happen? Was there much shaping that you did as a trio to actually make that happen, or really did it evolve more as a community sort of evolution?
Well, I've learned very quickly you can't make people think what you want them to think.
Yeah.
So it was very much, we had an idea, and people, when we explained that idea, they heard a different thing. And what they heard included much more people than we meant it to, which in hindsight was a lovely, lovely surprise. And so really it was just who showed up, right? I mean, that's your community at the end of the day, is the people who show up. And that's really where we've grown, is the people showed up, they kind of self-identified, and we listened, instead of trying to force our vision in some specific way. It was like, oh no, this is way better than what we were thinking. Like, well done, wisdom of the crowd.
And
So, yeah.
what
really
year was that, just out of interest?
That would have been 2013.
Okay.
Wow.
Yep.
So it's a pretty young community, really.
Yeah, definitely. I always remember that date because it was also the year I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. And that was, 5 days. I left for hiking it 5 days after the first conference, which in the scheme of bad ideas I've had was a horribly bad idea. But yeah, it's been really kind of grown pretty interestingly from then. We just had our 5th Portland conference this last year. So.
Wow. Eric, what's your favorite hike in your area at the moment?
Oh, I love the Pacific Northwest. It's so there's a reason I live here. It's really pretty up here. So the Wallowa Mountains in Eastern Oregon, the North Cascades, that's my hat. That I have on is the North Cascades. So yeah, there's so much. The Olympic National Park, the Pacific Northwest is a profoundly beautiful place.
Hey Tom, I actually understand you're quite into. You're into hiking as well. Or you're more into bike riding, aren't you, mate?
Lately I've just been biking. Yeah, you commented on my picture of the Coyote Creek Trail that I was biking on. That's nice. Yeah, it's beautiful out here too. I mean, the whole West Coast is just rich with all kinds of natural resources.
So Eric, you mentioned Read the Docs. For folks who don't know what Read the Docs is, could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So to step back a little bit further, I was influenced by the Python community. So that's really kind of where I got the documentation bug in 2010 when Read the Docs was started. And they really have this concept. I mean, they'd been doing Docs as code for 5-10 years. And they'd built a tool called Sphinx, which is still the best documentation tool that I've found that kind of marries that concept of Docs as code together. And I think it's been around, I guess, for 10 or 15 years now. And so I really kind of, Read the Docs was my way to kind of add onto that concept, a hosting platform. So if you kind of are from the technical side, you can think of it as continuous integration for documentation. So literally, or not literally, but whenever you commit code, a webhook fires and it hits Read the Docs, we pull down that change, we automatically rebuild it into PDF, EPUB, and HTML, and then host that for the world to see. So we map to tags and branches on your version control and all that good stuff. So we basically just allow you, we're like a layer of documentation publishing on top of your existing software workflow is basically the way I think about it.
Okay. So how many users do you think you have that you have at the moment for Read the Docs?
Yeah, I mean, scale's a funny thing to try and figure out. I think we have about 60,000 projects last I counted, and we do about 35 million page views a month. So yeah, we're one of the top 1,500 websites on the internet. So
that's a pretty monumental achievement. Yeah, well,
And he said that
that's very cool.
Yeah, who knows? Documentation is like a thing that people read.
Yeah, who would have thought, right?
It's right there in the name, but we got to be emphatic about it sometimes.
Look, I've been doing a lot of talking now. I think I might open some questions to someone else. Hey, Chris, do you want to ask Eric or Mikey anything?
I think maybe I might jump forward a little bit in terms of timeline and say, well, yeah, we've got Mikey on. Mikey, when and why did you get involved with the community, I guess?
Yeah, I was like, please don't ask me about hiking because that's not my thing.
Don't ask me about hiking either.
I noticed that the European-based people are just silent when all the people talking about hiking. So I got into Write the Docs. I've been a tech writer for almost 10 years. So I started with more traditional sort of like, I've always been in enterprise software, so pretty geeky stuff. And then I moved from Israel, where I'm from, to Czech Republic to work for Red Hat as a tech writer. And about 6 months after I started working there, something like that, my manager turns up and he says, there's this conference called Write the Docs that's coming to Budapest. And this was like March 2014. And he says, we should totally go because it was like a train ride. And he says, I should give a talk. And I've never given a talk ever, although I do have stage experience and performing arts and whatever. But I was like, okay. And I've never worked in open source before or whatever, but I've managed to find some kind of topic that I can submit a talk and get that going. And we just, myself and my manager at the time and another colleague of mine, we just got on a train and went to Budapest to Write the Docs. We had no idea what to expect, except we know that there was already a conference happening in Portland. And then we just turned up and found an amazing bunch of people. And it was, I think that was still when Eric, on the list of your bad decisions was to do the European conference at the same month or something, right? It was like a month.
I was going to bring that up as my second worst decision, and right. Yeah, no, they were 6 weeks apart.
So Eric and Troy came in from Portland with a bunch of other people, and they were running that conference remotely. They were organizing it. They had a local sponsor company that was hosting it. It was Prezi. Really cool people too. And I think the conference was like 100 people, I want to say, something like that. And they were organizing the whole thing remotely, and we just turned up and we had a wonderful time. And I really felt like, so this was my second conference ever, because when you're a tech writer in a traditional company in Israel, you don't get to travel too much. But being based in Europe kind of opened the floodgates, I guess, to my travel bug. And working in open source, I got exposed to open source communities and how they do conferences and how communities work. I was never exposed to that at all. So I got familiar with Write the Docs in parallel to getting familiar with open source communities. I started in JBoss, and then I got involved into Python. And my day job is I basically document OpenStack, which is based around Python, and I work also with Django girls. So the Python and Django communities are also quite close to my heart, but from the documentation side. So I've never been a developer. So I had a great time in Budapest. And then I think it was like a few months later, myself and another community member, Christoph and Tom, we decided to ad hoc organize a 2-day unconference in Berlin. And just because it was wedged between two conferences that a lot of people were already there. And that kind of sparked the bug of organizing things, because I've always liked organizing things. And I really wanted to help promote documentation awareness amongst developers, among the non-writers. And I really felt like Write the Docs was doing something really, really cool. And they're doing it with a really great spirit of open source communities. And that's when I decided that I wanted to step in and organize the next European conference. And that's when we basically moved it to Prague, because I was living in Brno, which is not far from Prague, and now I live in Prague. So that's kind of how I evolved from just gave a talk for the first time ever, didn't know what anything was going on, to actually running the conference. And now we've had the third conference in Prague was this year, and the fourth European total. And
I think that's, and sorry, a fly keeps landing on my face. So if I make weird facial expressions, it's nothing to do with anybody. I got this lamp, and I think it's just anyway. I think it's a nice indication that there's a lot of people who feel that organizing events, getting involved with organizing events, even speaking at events is hard, and it can be. But I think it's a nice story to illustrate that it needn't be, and you can throw yourself right into whatever you want to throw yourself into quite easily with no prior experience. And just a follow-up question to both of you, seeing as you mentioned the C word, this is possibly a hard question to answer, and you don't have to pick if you don't want, but what's your favorite thing about the Write the Docs community, or what's your favorite part of the community? Thing, part, noun, whatever, of the community.
I guess I'll take that, softball. But yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe this isn't quite a noun answer, but it's really the kind of the diversity of both people and job title. And I view that as something that we've been given from kind of the tech writing history, where this industry has been much more kind of, it just has so much more diversity in lots of reasons. And, my general feeling is because as developers have become more and more highly paid, they've been slowly kicking everyone else out, unless you were like a white dude. and those people have kind of scattered about in the auxiliary, community outside of that. And so it's much more diverse kind of by nature. And I feel like that's something we really just need to hold on to and really kind of take as a responsibility to not ruin and really try to make the events as inclusive and accepting as possible. And that's somewhere where we really do that with both, kind of job titles, where it's like not just for writers, not just for developers. It's really kind of a mixing pot of, diversity of background, but also, basically any aspect of diversity that you can think of is something we're really trying to promote, to not have kind of a monoculture. And I know this is one of the kind of my answers to one of the other questions, which is kind of how Write the Docs is different than some of the other kind of existing communities. And I think the way that I've really started to think about this over time is that we are not a software, we're not a tech comm community, which is, I think, what is, how the question was phrased. We're kind of a software documentation community. We did along the line kind of specialize in software, because early on that wasn't actually explicit and people got really confused and disappointed. And so we did really, originally we were just like, we only care about documentation. And then the Boeing engineer documentation people would come and be like, what? Like, what is an API? This is what? And so we really, in terms of truth in marketing, we had to specify that, because it was really what we were doing as kind of software people. But I think it is not just for writers, and it is not just that kind of sole focus. And I think the experience of having people from different backgrounds, that diversity brings value in any organization, comes just as much, if not more, from diversity of job titles than diversity of life experience, because we're there to talk about work. And so diversity of work experience is really the fundamental diversity, I think, that is the most valuable and hopefully unique.
Yeah, I agree. And that's definitely one of the things that attracted me to the community at first, even though Eric may not have been aware of it at the time, because he was still trying to do a Read the Docs community. But what I saw was that people from, even though it's still primarily open source software affiliated job titles, it's not just that. And it's not just, so the thing that I love about the community is that it is different, and it's not a specialized, but it is more of a holistic view of anything that has to do with communication and content And that's something that's relevant to a lot of different roles, a lot of different industries. I mean, so the first thing I noticed is like I can sit in a table or in a room with developers and support engineers and UX designers and, you know, DevRel and people from open source, from proprietary software companies, people from education, from the science fields, you know, and people who use Python, people who use Ruby, people who use, you know, Java, people who are in different. And this is also coming from experience from developer events, you know, the things that would divide people in other communities. So would you have like a Python conference or a TechCom conference or specifically a support conference? All of those people from the different communities come to write the docs and they don't fight. You know, they get along and they collaborate and they share ideas, you know, and they don't spend time, you know, flame wars about Python versus Ruby or like nobody cares because we're all trying to achieve a goal of improving communication in our fields, in our roles, you know, so that's one of the beautiful things that I really, really like about it. And that's also what I think one of the things that makes us different from a lot of the specialized communities, because we don't try to specialize. We welcome everybody.
I'll kind of take the ball back just because that actually gave me an interesting insight. And that is the fact that if you have a Ruby and a Python developer, and they both come to write the docs, they're going to feel the most connected than if they go to any other event, right? They're kind of like, oh, people like me at this event, I'm connected with them. I feel at home with them. I want to like build community with them. Whereas if you go to a Python conference, you're a Ruby person, you feel very weird and kind of othered, right?
Others, really.
Right. Well, we're all others, and that's the beauty, right? Is we're all kind of different and weird in our own way. And that is, I think that's like, that insight is really profound in that you can come to some events and feel excluded, but like you can come to events and feel excluded to the people you're closest to because you have some kind of group rivalry or mentality that kind of like the two people that are there's a name for this, where the people that are closest together fight the most over the smallest things. And I think that when you come to an event outside of that area, you really start to actually connect over the similarities rather than the differences of those two people. And I think that's really, really interesting.
Hey, I wanted to jump in here with some thoughts. It seems like you're identifying this larger trend of having people other than official technical writers involved in documentation. You've got developers creating docs, other people involved in a software group creating docs, whereas traditionally in like TechCom conferences, the official quote technical writer is the one who handles all the documentation. So is like one of the defining characteristics this trend towards everybody being a tech writer, everybody doing documentation, rather than a specialized role being responsible for documentation?
Can I take that one, Eric? All right. So I get this question, and we actually kind of get this question a lot. And this is part of what led, I guess, to the term documentarian. And when you're asking something about, you know, developers creating documentation, support engineers creating documentation, you don't actually have to documentation to care about it, right? So if I'm a developer, I might want to be a part of Write the Docs so that I can learn about how to be more documentation friendly in my development workflow while not necessarily actually doing the work, right? So it's more about the collaboration, and the term documentarian means people who care about documentation regardless of role. And the role in this case means regardless of what you actually do. So if a developer hears about Write the Docs and says, well, if I go to this, does it mean I actually have to write documentation? No, but it might help you learn how to communicate with your technical writer better. If you're working in a company where you have dedicated technical writers, or if you're working on a small open source projects where you have to write your own documentation, it can help you learn more things. Or, you know, a lot of developers that I've worked with for years just had no idea what I do. And, you know, if they turn up and they hear about the things that we do and the tools and the trends, you know, then they may not necessarily leave a conference and go, wow, I really want to write some documentation. But when I go to work the next day or week or year, they're going to be more understanding of what I do as a tech writer, or will be able to find some way to bridge some of the gaps while allowing people to do what they want to do, as in write code or docs or support articles or things like that. So,
yeah, and developers write documentation every day. It might be a different kind of documentation, but I think that's really, as coming from the dev side, that's been the eye-opening thing for me is, documentation, I guess. And this is where kind of the tech comm label is maybe even more appropriate, and I just rally against it because it has baggage or kind of pre-existing meaning. But it is really all about communication, right? Every email you write, every commit message, every code comment, all of that is documentation. All of that is kind of communication that must be done with clarity. And I think that's really been the thing for me is that thinking about documentation as like an artifact that is like it is both a product as well as a process. And it's also just all kind of internal communication within a company is almost all text these days, right? Like Slack, email, commit messages, like all these things, everyone's communicating in text all the time because that is like the artifact that is like the canonical artifact of all things. So I think everyone has so much value to be learned from learning how to communicate properly and write documentation well. To kind of answer the actual kind of like question as well, like I do think documentation is something that should be a process of a team, not a person. And that person should be part of a team and there should be collaboration. But I guess I don't even really think about it in those terms coming as a developer who has to write documentation, both because there's like sets of things that only developers can write for the most part, like API references and these things, like all the stuff like design documents. There's, especially in the technical products where I work building developer tools, like I am the primary person writing documentation, and most of the people I know are the primary people, writing open source, tooling. That's a skill they need. That is a marketing skill. That is a fundamental part of their job. And so I think like there is a type of technical writing where people work as a team to produce an artifact that is documentation. But I also think there are so many more scenarios in the world where all these people, a marketing person is writing some copy about their product and they need to know how to communicate that to developers. That's a type of documentation. And so I really do kind of think my understanding of the term has grown a lot. And I really do start to kind of value just the purity of good communication, whether it's, written or otherwise. But so much of what we do is written, and that's kind of the focus on writing, I think is kind of because it is canonical. But I'm going to stop lathering a little bit there.
No, that gets to the heart of really where I was going with that question and why I was asking about the diversity of roles, and is because I just want to kind of identify what is the defining characteristic of Write the Docs that separates it from other technical writing groups, conferences. And I think it's this idea of all these, as you say, these other roles who are caring about documentation, and they're coming together and they're sharing tips and best practices rather than just the official tech writer doing his or her job as he or she has always done, or focusing on that kind of proprietary official role. So I think that's cool, and it definitely fills a gap. I have some follow-up questions, but I'll let somebody else ask something.
I have a follow-up answer as well. And just to maybe clarify what that rambling I just did is I think really what I'm trying to do is like implement the open source workflow on top of organizations, where in an open source project, anyone can come and touch a piece of code and someone else will review it, and it's very fluid and there's very little ownership. And I think that's like from that background is where I see the world, and kind of Docs as code as like the work Anne is doing with her book and all this kind of stuff is like trying to take that and like systematize it and explain it to people. And I think it's very much just like trying to model open source and like the mythos and kind of concept behind that in a way that like people can integrate into business processes. I think that is the thing that we're trying to do, and I think that's where the miscommunication maybe even comes from, because I just assume the world works that way. Because I've never worked in a corporation, you know, I've never worked at a big company.
Yeah.
I've been open source my whole life.
I'm laughing. Yeah, sorry, I'm laughing because I understand what you're saying, and I want to add to that, which is one more thing that makes us different, is that unlike, let's say, a more traditional TechCom organization, like Eric said, we're basically sitting on top, on the shoulders of the open source philosophy, where all of our resources are free. You know, you obviously pay to attend a conference, but that's basically to cover the expenses and the running costs of the community, right? But we're not isolating the role of the tech writer, and we're not just, you know, it's not like a more traditional guild style organization where we're just saying, no, please have all of it. Like our website, everything's open source, everything's on GitHub, you know, anybody can contribute, you know, people step in and fill different roles throughout the year, depending on what they do. And we're very encouraging of this. And to me, it's even more exciting because even though Eric has lived this, and he assumes everything works that way, I've not always lived this. I've only been working in open source for the last 4 years out of almost 10 of, you know, so the first 5 years I spent in that very isolationist kind of mentality. And then when I broke out of that to open source, I was like, oh, wait, this is way better. Why can't we do everything like this? So that's what keeps a lot of people engaged as well, who come to the community from other more traditional places as well. So now I'm going to stop.
Hey, so do you think that this foundation on open source principles is what will allow the community to continue to run on a volunteer model without a lot of paid staff? I mean, I know you have maybe 1 or 2 people who receive a marginal compensation for organizing like an entire conference, but by and large, Write the Docs is entirely volunteer run. Is it because of the open source foundation?
I mean, I think so. Like, I think that ethos, like if we had built a wall and all the talk videos were behind the wall and you had to pay to get the videos, I think it would be like profoundly harder to get people to contribute their labor for free. Like, I think because we're not fundamentally building an extractive business, people are willing to contribute to that in a meaningful way that feels fundamentally differently and provides a greater sense of ownership than contributing to a business. And we are starting to build, right, a small business to kind of effectively build the community. So we actually now have, 4 people paid, 1 day a week effectively to work on Write the Docs. Myself and Mikey are 2 of them. Sam and Kelly are the other 2. And but yeah, that is a pittance compared to the scale. Read the Docs was serving millions of page views a day and literally has 2 full-time people working on it, right? I'm very used to this method of living and existing in the world. But there's something very magical and not fully rational about open source. And there's a lot of problems with that model if it becomes extractive or exploitive. But I think in this context, with proper kind of shepherding, which we're really explicitly trying to do, it can be very, very powerful and empowering more than extractive and entrapping. So that was a very abstract answer, but
I think the thing that attracted me to Write the Docs is the fact that because of it's so genuine and authentic as a community, it's full of people who are passionate about documentation. They're not there, as you find in some other organizations, just because they want their name attributed to an organization, because that makes them feel like they are part of the community there. They actually are involved deeply in Write the Docs in whatever way they want to be involved in Write the Docs. So it's the aspects of flexibility as well as just I think the dedication of everyone who does actually participate in the community that attracted me to it. And it was really important for me when I found Write the Docs. I went from a very structured environment of Red Hat, in a large technical writing team to being a lone wolf basically, and having to set up Labrokes, documentation, backplane. And that was a daunting task without any backup, and the systems and all the big organization tooling that we had at Red Hat. So Write the Docs was essentially like, it turned into my, I guess, my sort of detached documentation team that I could go to and sound off ideas about, and get tips about setting up tooling and work out different approaches to things that people have already gone down the path of trying to implement and failed at or learned lessons from. And it really made me grow as a technical writer, probably more, I think, in a lot of ways in the 6 years that I was at Red Hat, because of just there's such different ways of thinking that are out there in the community. And it was quite, for me, it was really quite an amazing feeling to get that sort of exposure to all the different brains in Write the Docs. So for me, it came at just the right time. I forget how I actually found out about the community. I think it might have been one of Tom's posts, perhaps, that I stumbled across, because I sort of had to level up my technical writing quite a bit when I left Red Hat, and sort of reach out to communities and sort of, get more information about how things were done outside open source in some respects as well. So, this was a way of doing that for me. So yeah, I'm very grateful for what Write the Docs was able to give me in that particular point in time in my journey as a technical writer.
And that's what this for. Right, and that builds this circle, right? That kind of gratitude that you have is what makes you get up at 7 in the morning or whatever it is there to do a podcast, and you just like that is that that circle.
Yeah, and thank you for the podcast.
Yeah, and we have a podcast where you are all literally in like time zones 8 freaking hours apart. like I think that that like the work Swapnil has done in Australia has just been profoundly impressive. Like we just kind of find these people that are amazing, and we let them go and do the thing, and they really get what they need out of it. And but I think if you like put down a spreadsheet and you're like, how do open source communities work, you end up with a lot of like shitty math. Like
open source communities work really because they work. It's just
right,
how it is, right?
it's very illogical, and I think
there's also a high risk of people who are long-term contributors to open source projects, of burnout, of the volunteer kind of, would you do it again for free type of question, and because we have such a diverse range of roles, and we have so many different things that people can do in the community, because we don't have, our main thing is not delivering software, but it's more like I feel like we're more of a social professional network, that's just global. And there's a lot of different ways that you can grow the community and sort of increase the collaboration. So people can contribute in a lot of different ways. You can run a podcast, you can write for the newsletter, you can moderate our Slack channel, you can run a meetup, you can it's not just you must contribute code or documentation or do test, so it's such a wide range. People can really contribute in whatever way they want.
So I know that there are lots of new Write the Docs groups forming all over the place, and more venues. We have API, the docs, and other things. How do you ensure that these new groups kind of embody these open source principles and other kind of foundational principles that remain, that make the Write the Docs unique? Do you train these people? Do you put qualifiers about event restrictions?
It's a good question. and I think that's one we still haven't fully figured out. We've taken a few passes at this, and it is still an ongoing, fundamentally hard thing. Like I think I tongue-in-cheek said earlier, right? You can't kind of like force people to understand something. And that's really, I think the best thing that we've found is to basically require coming to a conference before you do anything, super like meaningful or important. And so that's kind of been the traditional kind of litmus test is like, I literally cannot write down or sit down and write and tell you what is special. But if you come, you'll see it and you'll feel it and you'll know if it's not there. And that's really, I think, you know, it's something that like is an experience that we hope we can put some guide rails and guidelines and processes around to, you know, make people, or not make people, but empower people to also run events similarly. But, you know, it is a fundamentally hard thing.
That's one of the things that, on the one hand, because we're not restrictive, because we encourage people, because we empower people to go and do the thing, then it's not always, you know, you have the risk of people going and doing a thing that might not be that thing that you were hoping that they would do, right? So one of the things, like Eric said, is to ask people to come to the events and to interact with the community and to help. Like, so if somebody wants to organize an event like a one-day conference or another conference, is, you know, to come and actually help in the organizing team to see how we run things as well. And this is also something that's a work in progress, but is to document how we do things. You know, I mean, this is the documentation community. So of course we want to be able to document how document our philosophy. Like, we're constantly adding content to the community website. We have an organizer guide. You know, we also have the documentation guide. We have documents about how to start a meetup. You know, we have a very, very, we have a living, breathing, always evolving code of conduct, which is not just on a personal level, but also on a contributor level. So we try to be as explicit as possible about what we see as the philosophy and the way of the sort of Zen of write the docs, I guess, and really try to hope that people will follow that.
Yeah, well, maybe a bit more kind of a framing or a reframing is I truly believe that the value of communities is in the experimentation. And so I think there's a view of the world in a traditional business where anything that you don't want to happen is wrong, and you will stop it from happening. I'm much more, you know, it just practically the only real way we can run this thing is to take the things that work really well and do more of them and kind of promote them and give people ideas, because there's nothing we're going to be able to do to stop people from doing things that don't work. We do things that don't work all the time. Like, you know, we do really dumb experiments that but it's you know, we water the things that work, and if you kind of ignore the thing that doesn't work long enough, like, unless it becomes a real problem, like a code of conduct issue or something, you know, you keep telling people the things that work and what people like and the community you're building, and, you know, every once in a while we'll have something that kind of raises to the level of like conflict where we have to like send nasty grams and say, hey, you can't use our name. Like, that's not cool. Like, you literally didn't talk to us. But, you know, I think in general, we really just try to promote the things that work. And that is a scalable model of community. And people, if things work, people will continue to do them. And people that do things that, like, it is very likely that the thing they're doing is not working. And it will change to something more in line in order for it to grow. And so I think it somewhat self-regulates, and I try not to think too much about the actual problem because it is a fundamentally hard one. So
I think the community itself polices itself. So when you know, I think there was a situation where I did see something that didn't sit right with me at the docs, and I brought that up, and that was dealt with regards to using the name, because as a member of Write the Docs, I feel that, you know what is right, and you know what happens in the community, and you get a sense of, you know, what, even if it's just implied, it's sort of, you absorb the feeling of what's right and what is sort of over the line. You have this sort of intrinsic feeling, or at least I do. And in that particular case, we just brought it up, and it was dealt with very swiftly and respectfully, and that was good. So I think in a lot of ways, we all just keep an eye out for each other and make sure that, you know, if something doesn't feel right, we just talk about it, because, you know, we are communicators after all. Being documentarians, we do know how to string words together and relate to people, because it's part of what we have to do as technical writers. So that's something that we can actually do pretty effectively, I think.
I agree.
Are you guys experimenting with anything new? You mentioned that you welcome trying new things. You've got a conference this year. Is there anything different that you're doing this year?
There's always something different. No. That is what I think. That is one of the stresses of organizing, right? It's like, oh, what are we going to do this year? Like, we can't just do the same thing as last year. And maybe this is actually a good story. Kind of that illustrates the previous point as well, is last year we had this thing where a bunch of folks were putting up job related things in our unconference board. So they were like, hey, come work at company X, come work at company Y, come work at company Z. And like, there basically became like a channel of the unconference that was just like job things. And we're like, that's not really what unconferences are for. Like, we're like, oh, this is so bad. And I'm like, getting mad, and it's like, wait, we didn't tell anyone like that they couldn't do that, you know, like people, this is obviously something that people want. And so what we did is like, I you know, got mildly annoyed, thought about it, but you know, that is kind of the community expressing, I have to remember that's the community expressing a preference to us, and that's something that they want. And so what we're experimenting with this year is doing a job fair. So we will actually have an option for sponsors to, basically, we'll take the unconference in the morning on day 2 and turn the unconference room into a job fair. So all the sponsors who are hiring can come down and have a table and say, you know, come talk to us about jobs. This is going to be really cool. Like, this is the place you want to talk about jobs. Like, here's the big freaking thing with a circle around it and like red letters that's like job stuff. You know, this is the job place. Do the job things in the job place. You know, don't do the job things in the other place. But you know, and some of that was like frustration, but it's also very much like that's a perfect example of the community expressing a need and us thinking like, how do we fulfill that need in a way that is like beneficial to everyone? So,
hey Chris, did you want to add something, mate?
Yeah, I realized my microphone was, I thought I was being ever so clever by muting my microphone on the microphone, and wondered why Tom kept talking over me, and realized it was that I was muted the whole time. So,
we were just wondering why you're so polite and quiet.
Taking Tom's question slightly further and more abstractly, as we sort of draw to a close soon anyway, let's ask the big, broad, vague question. In the next year, because we're nearly at the end of one, the next years, what do you see as the trends for our industry / community / whatever else you want to call it?
Mikey?
Someone's Stephanie.
So, okay, all right, I'll bet. So I think now, after trying to ramp up our infrastructure and get a long-term non-burnout kind of core team for maintaining and building things and experimenting, I mean, we came to a point now where it's not even the end of 2017. We already have the website for the 2018 conferences, which is amazing. So by investing the effort and building this kind of framework that we can work from, I think, from the way I see it anyway, and Eric may jump in and correct me on different things, but the way I see it is that now that we've dealt with a lot of the sort of basic, like, foundational concerns, we can really start experimenting and building more things that will help the community. So the things like the job fair, we might even take that to an online space. You know, things like making the meetups maybe more robust and working on different experiments, maybe doing more events. I don't know, like now that we can replicate a lot of these efforts more easily, then we have a capacity to grow and to grow the community and to allow more people to participate as attendees, as contributors. So I don't know exactly, I don't have a list, business plan type of thing, but that's kind of how I feel the next year or two are going to be. And Eric, please feel free to cut in and add or edit.
No, that was great. I was like, I got really abstract. I was like, what are the trends in the industry? like that's something I think about.
Go on, what are they?
Yeah, I didn't really talk about the industry. I kind of talked about the community side. So, I mean, as far as the industry is concerned, we kind of because we get a cross section of a lot of different areas in the industries. I mean, I know, like in my day job, what Red Hat's doing, kind of, they do a lot of experiments as well to get a little bit closer and reduce the entry barrier for inside the company, for example. And I see this, like if you look at the talks that we've had at Write the Docs over the last like couple years, 2-3 years, right? So like, because in the beginning in the community, you don't really, now that we have an interesting way to slice the different themes of the talks. So a lot of people are talking about culture change. A lot of people are talking about making things more simple to contribute. A lot of people talk about what I learned about documentation from making video games or writing novels or, doing all these different things. And I kind of see that this is as a thing that's going to keep going. I don't know. Yep. I don't know. Maybe we'll just all turn over our jobs to AI, and who knows?
And it's all going to the cloud.
It's
already. I think so. I do want to ask y'all a question, but I will kind of comment on that just in terms of the fact that we do have a CFP open. But we let the trends come to us. Like we really don't try to kind of like tell people what to talk about, because like all things, they know much better than we do what they're interested in and what they're excited about. And so we really do with the CFP, we give some guidelines and things, but we're very like open. And I firmly believe that everyone submitting a talk is going to be much smarter about whatever they're submitting a talk about. And so I'm not going to like rein them in, like come out of left field and like tell me the crazy thing that I can like connect to some other crazy thing, and we make more crazy things. Like I think that's so much of the value that I just, people come with stuff that's really out of left field and really valuable. But it is now 5 minutes left, and I'm going to turn the tables because there is a question on here that says, where would you like to see Write the Docs go? Because we are a community after all. So I think I'm gonna start with Tom, because he actually has a deadline. So I want to let you not be stressed while you answer.
I would like to see more virtual events, maybe. I feel like there's a lot of Write the Docs meetups, and there's definitely a strong value in meeting and interacting with people. And there's an awesome Slack channel online. So I don't know what other sort of virtual type interactions you can leverage, but
webinars, man, like doing talks and pushing out information to the community. Yeah. That's interesting.
Things like that. Just because, I mean, even I used to travel up to the city, San Francisco, for the meetup because it has so many people, but it's so draining to travel long distances. And I think we've got more connections that we can make online with people with diverse interests. I mean, look at this group of podcasters between Berlin and Australia and, the West Coast. It's like, now Prague. I like to bring together people through the online mediums rather than requiring physical travel. That's my main hope for. Which is one of the reasons we kind of started this podcast too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and record everything. record everything as well, because we're in a distributed environment. Like Write the Docs is global, and recording things, I will fully acknowledge, is not easy. Getting it right is actually pretty hard to do when you're recording a session. But if you can do your best effort, if you're an organizer of an event, and just try and get something captured, even if the audio is a bit sort of subpar, it doesn't matter. It's still getting the information out there and spreading what is the word about Write the Docs anyhow. So I think sharing in that way is very good as a community in 2018.
Yeah, that's definitely a useful thing. Like, there's so much knowledge, and we've done a really poor job of like curating Meetup. Like, a few different Meetups are doing different recordings and all these different things, and there's no like page on our our website that's like, here's all the Meetup recordings. This is where you should go to find them.
The archives are kind of an ongoing thing, a work in progress. We've had some conversations with Meetup organizers about like how it would be the best way to do talks at Meetups, and what kind of, how to generate assets and artifacts that you can actually keep. So that's definitely something that we can, want to, and should be looking at.
If anyone in the audience is looking for something they can help do.
Yeah, actually, I mean, so number one, I'm going to reiterate some of the things that Tom and Jared said, but also something that Eric just said. As a Meetup organizer, some of mine are a little bit personal. Please talk at Meetups. Actually, there's always an assumption that Meetup organizers are inundated with talks. It's the complete opposite. We usually are scrabbling for talks. So please, if you want to talk about something, just do it. It's completely open to anybody. That'd be the first thing. And I think secondly, just for where would I like to see my little corner of community go right now? I don't know if Mikey will reiterate this or not. I would love the Slack channel and generally the European side to be a little bit more active, so we can compete with the American side. The conference is good, but sometimes in between,
and not compete, we can enhance and we can add.
All right, well, to at least have, like, there's a lot of conversations that we miss because they happen in American time, and it would be nice to have some more conversations in European time zones as well. So there's a lot of us. Let's be as active, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah, that's kind of, it would be nice to have Europe a bit, and a bit more conversations happening. So let's feel free to talk about anything that's on your mind at the time during the hours of roughly 8 to 6 in the European time zones.
Yeah, I feel like Australia also has that problem. And they actually have their own channel, which I thought was really clever, because I'm sure that is a daily reality for folks in Australia, where it's like, we are in our own time bubble.
Yes, so we're actually from the future. I'll just have you know. So
fast. Yeah, I mean, I had a 7 a.m. call with Brisbane this morning, and now I have a 10:30 p.m. call with
yeah.
Hey,
we're used to it, right? Like, I remember at Red Hat, we were doing like 2 a.m. calls sometimes to sync up with Europe and the US, because Australia was always always drew the short straw when we were doing video calls and phone calls. But it's how the world works now. Like, you have to be flexible when you communicate.
Yeah, right? Time zones are hard. But everything makes sense. I would like to see more meetups in Europe come out, and I think people are. It's just maybe it's just a slightly different pace, but I think that things are moving forward. So I'm hoping to be able to see by this time next year a nice little explosion of meetups and communication happening in Europe. So if anybody wants help doing that.
Hey guys,
so we offer that.
Sorry to jump in here. I have to go to another meeting, but thanks so much for letting me join in on this podcast. Keep talking, and we'll definitely post all this and get great feedback. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Have a good one.
Yep. Bye bye.
Thanks, Tom. Really, I think it's probably.
One remaining question. I have one remaining question.
Okay,
which is
off you go.
related, but it's been bugging me the whole time. What are you doing, Eric? Are you on a walking desk or something?
This is the walking and talking.
I'm at a dancing desk. It is literally impossible for me to sit and talk.
That's my dancing desk is over there, but I'm sitting because I know if I stand, I'm going to be worse than Eric. I'm going to be dancing too.
Anyone who only was listening to the audio will have to go watch the video to understand what we were talking about.
It's a problem. I haven't done video call in forever. I am very much audio only and walk in the park while I talk to people, and they're always like, "Are those birds chirping in the background? Like, what is?"
Before you do this, I wrote to Eric before. I said, "Eric, you realize we have to be on camera?" And he's like, "What?"
So, yep.
Walking, talking.
Cool.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys.
Is that a wrap?
I think it might have to be because it's been an hour already. It doesn't feel like an hour at all. So that's a good thing because it means that it's flown really well and we've actually learned a lot of stuff today. So I'd just like to say again, thank you both for coming on and staying up late for us. And we always stay up late. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, really. And thank you for all the great work you're doing with the podcast.
For sure.
Oh,
do it again. Do it again.
Welcome. It's a pleasure. It's easier to talk about stuff about under the guise of write the docs when there's so many people in the community that we've had on to date. Through the people we know collectively that come on and just drop such knowledge that it makes every hour go so fast. It's a pretty common trend in the podcast that we go, oh yeah, okay, it's time to wrap that up now because wow, there goes an hour. Time
flies when you're talking about something you love. So
Yep, absolutely true. So I think in closing, I'll do the regular site, which is podcast.writethedocs.org. You can go there and have a look at all the past episodes we've done. And also get information about how to reach out to us, and talk more about the topics that we've brought up on the show, or perhaps follow up if you want to. So there's plenty of ways of doing that. You can create a forum, post it, or you can email us as well. So plenty of ways to reach out and get in contact. And we'd love to hear from you. Also, if you'd like to be on the show, I think next year in 2018, I think we might want to try and get more community members on the show as well each month to sort of share a bit about their aspects of being a documentarian. So if you've got an interest in doing that, as you can tell, we're a pretty friendly bunch here, and we just like to have a chat. So come on and have a chat to us about what you do, and there's a high likelihood that everyone will learn something from it. So it will be very good to hear more from you out there, our dear listeners. So thanks again, Eric and Mikey, and of course, remember docs, or it didn't happen.